War Chronicle from June 1916 documented the detailed statement made by the German government on the subject of the sinking of the Tubantia. Quote, according to the opinion of expert German naval authorities, it can happen owing to technical failures, regrettable as this is, that torpedoes, which have missed their aim, do not always sink. Experience has proved that these torpedoes often float about for days, and according to the imporosity of the chambers fixed at the head and tail of the torpedo, their position in the water is more or less inclined.
Hello, and welcome to the Shipwreck Archive.
Thank you. Would you happen to have the story? The debated sinking of the Tubantia.
Here we are. Enjoy!
The Tubantia, a 13,963-ton twin-screw steamship, had been launched in April 1914. She was described as palatial by many, and at the time was said to be one of the most luxurious ships to ever be built on the Clyde. Of particular note was her cold storage rooms and refrigeration system, perfect for keeping ship provisions fresh and also transporting perishable cargo. She had been specifically ordered by the Holland Lloyd Line to be employed on their route from Europe to South America, and she was definitely one of the finest vessels in their fleet, not to mention on the route from any other company as well. Unfortunately, soon after the Tubantia was launched, World War I would begin, and shipping would become progressively more dangerous. She was not likely to get many chances to show the world her impressive passenger accommodations, though the Tubantia's cargo capacity and use as a mail ship was still very much in demand. The Tubantia was also less likely to be in danger than many ships due to the Dutch having remained neutral as hostilities began to grow. She traveled with her name brightly illuminated, and the Netherlands flag in multiple places to ensure that no one could confuse her for an enemy vessel. On March 15th, the Tubantia departed from Amsterdam bound for River Plate with a crew of 280, under the command of Captain Witjesma, as well as 80 passengers. Almost all of her passengers were also from neutral countries, including Dr. Luis Salinas Vega, the Bolivian minister to Berlin. The good reputation of the Tubantia as the newest and finest vessel on the route, as well as her nature as a ship of a neutral nation, made her an attractive option for travel. As the evening progressed, the seas got choppy and the weather got hazy, causing Captain Witjesma to give the order for the ship to travel more slowly. It was estimated that she went down to a speed of about 9 knots. This meant that it was not until 2 a.m. that the captain gave the order for everything to be prepared to anchor near Noord Hinder. At 2:15, Captain Witjesma left the bridge to head to the chart room and oversee sounding that were being done. The ship's first, third, and fourth officers remained on the deck, however, and it was fourth officer Van Leuven who first saw the white streak in the water heading towards them. Though he shouted, "Look there!" as soon as he saw it, thinking immediately that it was a torpedo, it was far too late to do anything about it. A sailor named Groot, who was serving as lookout, would say that he had also seen a white streak in the water heading towards them, and he had no doubt that it was a torpedo, having seen them launched in practice before. 2 of the engine crew were in the upper coal bunker when the explosion happened towards the stern of the Tubantia. The entire ship shook with the impact, and the ship's steering mechanism was immediately made useless. The 2 engineers would say that, in the bunker, they had seen a faint light and there had been a powerful detonation. A stream of water had then almost immediately entered the bunker and cascaded into the engine room. The two men, with great difficulty, had managed to open a hatch and escape. Two of the engine crew were not so lucky, and would go down with the ship. The explosion was violent enough to not only cost two of the engine crew their lives, but also smash one of the ship's lifeboats, which were about to become vitally important. It was generally agreed that everyone had been calm on the Tubantia as they made their way to the lifeboats. The crew evacuated the passengers first in the boats, while most of the crew remained on the Tubantia for as long as possible to try to call for help on the ship's wireless. The 2:30 in the morning darkness mixed with the choppy seas, and the hazy weather meant that loading the boats was dangerous, no matter how calm everyone was. 2 more lives would be lost in the process, though it was never stated if those lost were passengers or members of the crew. Once all of the passengers were in the boats, they would spend the next several hours being tossed by the waves in the darkness until they reached the Noord Hinder lightship about 2 miles from where the Tubantia had been struck. The telegraph operator remained at his post for as long as possible, taking advantage of the fact that it would take 3 hours for the Tubantia to sink. In the meantime, he spent the entire time arranging for rescue ships to come and find them, and ships from both England and Holland were soon on their way. With this knowledge, the crew also finally evacuated with the senior wireless operator tapping out. Tubantia torpedoed and lost. I'm now leaving ship with Captain. Do not worry, as his final reassurance to those who he had been connected with via wireless. The Tubantia, the newest and finest passenger ship to sail under the flag of the Netherlands, sank at 6:53 a.m. Captain Vatisma would later send an additional telegraph to Amsterdam that would give more details about where the vessel was struck, as well as repeating the information that the Tubantia had been hit by a torpedo. It was later said by one source that soon after this telegraph was received, a telegraph also claiming to be from Captain Vatisma was received saying that the ship had hit a mine instead. Captain Vatisma said that he had never sent such a telegraph, and an attempt to muddy the waters was suspected. Even as the passengers and crew were being picked up by the rescue ships from the lightship and from the boats, the newspapers around the world, and in particular in the Netherlands, were beginning to express their outrage that a neutral ship had been sunk by torpedo, and fingers immediately began to point to Germany. Initially, Germany argued that the ship had probably been sunk by an English mine, not by a German torpedo. The crew had said that they had seen the trail left by a torpedo, but the conditions meant that this could be a mistake. This was backed up by an American passenger from the Tubantia named Richard Schilling. Richard Schilling, sharing a name with a consul to Berlin, was immediately assumed to be the same Richard Schilling, and his statement was highly valued, and his statement that the ship had struck a mine was published around internationally before the mistaken identity was discovered. It turned out that he was not involved in global politics at all. He was an insurance salesman from New York. It seemed as though the debate about how the Tubantia had sunk would continue indefinitely, but there was some evidence that it was still under investigation. When the steamship Batavia III had rescued the people in lifeboats 15 and 20, and rather than allowing the lifeboats to float away, the ship had towed the 2 lifeboats into the wharf at Rotterdam. From there, they were towed to Scheveningen, where they were carefully examined. In the boats were found fragmented pieces of bronze, part of the air chamber of a German Schwarzkopf 45-centimeter torpedo. The new argument put forward, a little more weakly by the German government this time, was that the British certainly had examples of their torpedoes in naval museums, and they could have given such a torpedo to one of their ships in order to frame the German Navy. This theory was spoiled when 2 more lifeboats from the Tubantia were brought to shore in early April. When the passengers and crew had been rescued, lifeboats 23 and 17 were allowed to drift away, but they washed ashore, and were immediately searched and put under guard. In these boats were found 2 scraps of copper, and on one of these pieces of copper was the number 2033. Facing steep international pressure, the German Admiralty acknowledged on May 11, 1916, that the markings on the torpedo signified that it had been a bronze torpedo C-4591, number 2033, which belonged to U-Boat 13. The German Admiralty stated, however, that U-Boat 13 had been about 12 miles away at the time of the sinking of the Tubantia. Not only that, but Torpedo 2033 was documented as having been launched at a British destroyer on March 6th, about 3 miles from the Noord Hinder lightship, but had missed its target. The German position on the matter was not strengthened when it was brought up that only a couple of days after the sinking of the Tubantia, the Dutch ship Palembang was sunk by 3 torpedoes, and again, German U-boats were suspected. The Hague sent a strongly worded letter of protest to Germany, reminding them of their neutrality, to which Germany replied again, suggesting that this was all part of a plot by England to make the 2 nations hostile towards one another. It was not a position that most in the Netherlands found believable, and this would be driven home later on February 22, 1917. 7 Dutch ships were leaving Falmouth, were attacked by U-boats only hours after leaving port. No matter how upset the Netherlands was by the sinking of the Tubantia, there was little that they could do while remaining neutral, and it was known by everyone that they did not want to get involved in the war if it could be avoided. In 1917, it was announced by Bolivia that they were severing all relationships with Germany, and they sent the German minister and his staff back to Germany with a message denouncing the attacks of German submarines on neutral vessels as the cause. It was pointed out by the press that a good reason for this strong stance suddenly being taken was the Bolivian minister's presence on the Tubantia when it had been sunk. The Holland-Lloyd Company's troubles were not over yet. With the loss of the Tubantia, they were in need of a ship to replace her. The shipyard that had built the Tubantia said that they would not be able to start building another ship for the line for 18 months, and it would cost more than the Tubantia had. The Netherlands Shipbuilding Company said that it would take them 4.5 years to build a vessel that size, and they quoted an even larger price. This would not work for the Holland-Lloyd line because they needed to replace the Tubantia as quickly as possible. Their attention turned to 3 ships that had been under construction for their rivals, the Hamburg-America line, when the war had started. Construction had stopped on the ships, and due to the depreciation of the German mark at the time, they were cheaper to buy than any other ship of the size on the market. The Holland-Lloyd line negotiated the purchase of the 2 ships, and as soon as the war was over, they paid the money to the Hamburg-America line, renamed the ships, and had them join their fleet. The international community called a foul, though, feeling that the 2 ships were rightfully German ships that had just been sold to prevent them from being seized as war reparations. It was a legal argument that went back and forth for a while, because the Holland-Lloyd line pointed out that the 2 ships had been incomplete when the purchase had been made, and they had never been registered in Germany. But this argument would fail in the end, and the 2 ships would be seized as part of the ships given to the United States. The Holland-Lloyd line would also never receive justice for the loss of the Tubantia from the courts, with a final ruling from the courts coming in 1922, several years after the end of the war. The Hague announced that while they did firmly believe that the Tubantia had been sank by a German U-boat, Whether it was a deliberate sinking or an accident was impossible to discover for several reasons. That it had been a torpedo was mostly determined by the shrapnel, as well as the word of the crew of the ship, which was considered credible. If there had been any evidence that it had been a British mine, that would have also been believable. In June 1919, 6,200 mines washed up on the coast of the Netherlands and had to be disposed of by the Dutch Coast Guard. Majority of these mines were British. The Holland Lloyd Line provided an expert to the court at The Hague who said that a torpedo fired on the 6th would have traveled 19 miles away from where the Tubantia was by the time of the impact due to the currents. Germany, meanwhile, provided an expert who argued that this was not the case, and that the torpedo would have remained in the area where it was fired due to other factors. It was not something that the courts could determine conclusively. They were also lacking in many records, since the German records of U-boat warfare had been destroyed towards the end of the war. And so the statements that they had were mostly from the memory of various officials or unverified. U-boat 13 would say that they had fired on a ship that only had a light for the masthead on the 16th of March, 1916, but that it had not been a ship with illuminated markers that said what ship it was and what nationality. The court was able to theorize that the recording of the torpedo number fired on the 6th had been a clerical error, and that, due to the heavy fog close to the ocean on the night of the incident, the lights, the Tubantia, had been obscured, but it was never known for certain. There would be no repayment to the owners of the Tubantia for the loss of their ship, and they would have to buy back the 2 ships that they had bought from the Hamburg America line from the United States. The final legal arguments regarding the Tubantia were heard on August of 1923, though in this case it did not involve how she had sunk at all. At the time of her sinking, she had diamonds as part of her cargo, and also, it was rumored, gold. It was enough to cause 2 rival salvage companies to wind up in court, the one having been already working on the wreck when the other ship arrived and began to prevent their work. The case was decided in favor of the first salvage company, it having been decided by the court that this was a case of first come, first serve. But there does not seem to be any record of the salvage company in question having recovered any of the treasure that they had fought for.
For more information, please see the New York Times from March 18, 1916, or see other sources in the description below.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for visiting the Shipwreck Archives. See you soon.